It's a pleasure for the Institute to give me an opportunity to reflect on the very meaningful and powerful goals and extraordinarily potent goals that you have put in place to further your work. And I'm going to try to speak to each of these four goals within a time frame. In terms of the first goal, to identify and promulgate models of educational excellence for students of African descent and to strengthen the pedagogical skills of practitioners. It's extremely vital that we understand that there have been models that we do not have records of. One of the reasons for developing an elders house was to try to gather the historical references to people like Septimus Clark, Ida Baker, and other people who did tremendously successful work in terms of bringing children of African ancestry to success in educational settings, even when those settings were hostile to them. So, in an effort to identify those successful models of the past, as well as those that are going on at the present time, it is important to understand that very often these models do not get publicity because the goals of having children of African ancestry achieve academic success has not always been a goal of public education. In fact, the way the educational identity of students of African ancestry has been defined will tell you automatically that it was not a goal to change that chain. For example, identifying children as disadvantaged, culturally deprived, at risk, endangered species, without moving from that to the point of saying, how do we correct this, is an indication very clearly that that was not a goal. In spite of its not being a goal, historically there have been teachers, there have been lay people, there have been parents, there have been elders who have themselves developed these models and still are. And it's extremely important that the work of the Institute be validated in terms of gathering this information and being able to replicate it. And the second point in the goal is to prepare practitioners. It's appalling that today there is an effort being made to keep teachers from being successful with African American and African ancestry students because there is the effort to prevent the true story of the history of the globe, of Africa, and of America in the school setting, and very serious efforts being made. Now, certainly the concern that people would not be uncomfortable with the truth uh, has been given an urgency that wasn't there when we considered the importance of the fact that these children were failing, or the schools were failing, the setting was failing them. So it's extremely important that we understand that this motive, this goal, this first goal, is extremely important, particularly when today there appears to be a serious threat to prevent that story from being told as it affects students of African ancestry, and in your goal when you talk about enabling practitioners to be successful. If you penalize teachers for teaching the truth in the history, then they're not going to be successful because the goal of bringing African American and children of African ancestry to academic success certainly cannot eliminate the reasons why they have not as yet been able to achieve all that we want them to achieve, and we have not necessarily been able to replicate those models. Now, if those models include a history that is accurate of global history, of world history, and of the history of the building of America, then it's deeply threatened. And I think that we should think seriously about the danger that's involved. Now, how do we identify these models? It means that somebody has to be out there watching and keeping records and visiting institutions, primarily starting with early childhood, where the nursery rhymes and the curriculum are based on European models. European nursery rhymes, stories of violence, and stories that do not give a sense of the importance of humanity. If you will pick any one of them, Rockabye Baby, uh, whether you're talking about Little Red Riding Hood, whether you're talking about Humpty Dumpty, you're talking about stories of violence. And those stories of violence become a part of the curriculum and a part of the instructional programs in schools that are successful. So when we look for models, we have to look all the way back to curriculum areas from early childhood into the areas of elementary, middle, and secondary schools. And then we have to prepare these practitioners not just in the technicalities of teaching, but in the responsibility to speak the truth. If you are in a profession like medicine or law, there are certain laws that are outlined, there are certain procedures, there are certain imperatives that you follow. You don't have a choice to say, no, well, they say that penicillin is good, but I choose not to use it. You don't have that right. And we see that with the issue with the pandemic. They ask people to be vaccinated. They don't necessarily force them to be vaccinated, but when you see the numbers of people who die because they do not have the vaccination, then you say to yourself, gee, I have to say something. And that's what we should be doing with children. While we're looking at models of success, we also have to acknowledge the models of failure that start with curriculum that is alien and hostile, and the educational identity. Children have an educational identity that's given to them when they start school. And what is it? Disadvantaged, culturally deprived, endangered species. And then programs, books, instructional materials, and habits of pedagogy enhance that. And so we need to be very much aware of the enormity of the importance of that first goal. I would like to emphasize the fact that I don't know of any other organization or even an institution of higher learning that is focused on doing that, that is focused on looking at examples. When I look across the state and look at institutions of higher learning and look for schools of education that are examining worthwhile programs for African American students, I don't find them. I can recall as a regent, we made a visit looking at the climate, the ethnic and pedagogical climate for students of African ancestry in the colleges and universities and in New York State. Interestingly enough, when the state announced to the institutions of higher education, particularly the schools of education, of what we were about to do, they selected certain students and certain organizations to talk to us. But we found that they were not talking their own words. They were talking about the verbal objectives, which do not include statements like helping students of African ancestry to get the kind of support and recognizing their abilities. For example, even with the person who is now a possible nominee for the Supreme Court, talks about how she was tutored away from her ambitions to go to Harvard. We know that Michelle Obama talks about how she was discouraged from going to Princeton, where her brother had gone. And I have talked to so many, particularly African American men, whose ambitions in terms of achievement were actually discouraged. And so we need to be aware that we're not working in a vacuum or a theoretical framework of what we think should be done, but there is specific evidence to show that just the opposite has happened, that there have been systems put in place. And we know from the work of Ray Wimbush about the Mohawk Conference after Reconstruction came, and the president calling this meeting to find out what to do with these enslaved people who are now free. And they outlined what to do. Don't let them connect with the continent of Africa. Teach the teachers not to teach the history. There was no effort being made to look at a successful pedagogical model. There was efforts made to make a parchment for those who were free because they would be competitive for European laborers, and so they built the prisons. First one in Mississippi, Parchment, and that prison is still there today. As I close out on this first goal, I want to reiterate the importance of it, the lack of efforts being made in a systemic way to address the issues that are outlined in this goal, and to make sure that we understand that it is not pie in the sky. It's not something that's imaginary. It's not something that is retaliation for past wrongs, but it is an understanding of what happened in the past and the fact that it is still happening and today is gaining strength in terms of eliminating those things which will make the historical oppressor uncomfortable. I thank you for this opportunity to talk on Goal 1, and I'll move on to Goal 2. The second goal, I think,
It stopped.
speaks.
I don't have my glasses. I don't know what happened here. Okay, so you finished the first one, so that was good time. What does that say? 12 minutes. I don't have. Oh, I do have glasses in here. Why did it stop over there? And I don't know where it stopped. I don't know.